Polybridge 3 is coming out on May 30th, and the developers graciously gave me early access here to show it off for you guys. Now, I've already seen quite a few people check out the campaign, so I wanted to be a little bit different and try making a working bicycle in the sandbox. Now, loading into the sandbox here, I could see things looked very different than Polybridge 2, but I still decided to start out by pushing the islands together, and the first thing I wanted to try out was if this glitch engine from Polybridge 2 still worked in Polybridge 3. Now, the basic way this engine works is that you have a bunch of springs under tension, and whenever you attach a bunch of these up to a central node, they seem to start spinning around it. Now, after completing the ring here, I wanted to try tensioning the springs, but for whatever reason, it didn't really seem to want to move at all. Now, apparently this is just a minor bug, but fortunately, there is a very easy workaround for this. Now, starting out though, I do need to brace the outside of this wheel together, and once I did that, you can see I'm deleting all of the springs on the inside, and I'm replacing them with much smaller ones. By doing this, I can add in some hydraulics to tension up the springs, and by doing this, I should get a lot more tension than if I just tried pulling apart the springs normally. While all of the springs did end up getting pulled, I noticed it really wasn't rotating that much at all. There was a slight rotation, but I couldn't really tell what it was coming from, and it seemed like they ended up patching out this engine. Now, I was also thinking of one more type of engine that might work really well here. I've used this only a couple of times in the past, but you can see what I'm doing is attaching up a bunch of hydraulics to the top of this wheel. The plan is to have them expand and contract and spin around this wheel in the center. Now, trying this out though, once they expand, they seem to just instantly snap the steel and not really want to rotate the wheel. Now, even trying to add on some roads here to spin it around a little bit to get it started still caused it to break, and to get this work, I did need to turn it on braking mode. Now, this seemed like a pretty good start, but I noticed it wasn't really going far enough, so to hopefully fix that, I added on another set of hydraulics. Now, this, you can see here, I'm able to push down and actually rotate the wheel all the way around. This was a good start, and what I wanted to do is add on one more set of hydraulics on the bottom here to pull it back up. Now, with this, of course, I'm doubling the amount of power I can drive this around with, and trying this out now, I noticed there were a lot of problems. One of them you can see here is that it just wasn't really spinning around all that fast, and also it would occasionally completely stop. So the next thing I wanted to try doing here was making a more normal engine. For this, you can see here, I'm building up another ring, but this time I'm using a bunch of roads on the outside. Now, in the center of this, I wanted to put down a monster truck to spin this around and power up my vehicle. The problem though is that the monster truck is a completely different design in this game, and there wasn't a really good way to latch onto it and keep it in place. Now, I could see here though that this little car actually did seem to be pretty good, and while it did kind of break at first, just lowering the amount they pulled in seemed to solve the problem, and I could see here it was holding it down. The car seemed to start to move forward, but it was going really slow, and what I wanted to do is try buffing its stats and making it go a lot faster. Now, this did improve things a little bit, but you can see here it still seemed to be getting stuck. Now, lowering the tension once again on the hydraulics seemed to solve the problem, and I can see now I was actually spinning up this wheel. It would still break the springs if it got going too fast though, so to hopefully fix that, I added another fixed joint in the back and a couple of more springs. This wheel in the front though seemed to cause some problems as it was bouncing around, and the wheel totally disintegrated. Now, I tried lowering the speed of the car to hopefully fix that, and I did seem to get it working here. This should work great since it's honestly going at pretty good speed, and I don't really see any hitches or anything as it spins. So now with my power source sorted out, the next thing I wanted to work on was the legs. Now, that probably sounds a little weird, but I wanted to have sort of humanoid-like things sitting on this, and to get the pedaling effect that I want, I needed to add in a couple of legs. Now, to start out here, you can see I built up a couple pieces of steel like this, and while it doesn't look too much like a leg at the moment, once I added in the foot, I was hoping it was going to be a bit more clear. Now, to do that, you can see I used a bit more steel here, and I tried bracing up to part of the leg. This already seemed to be a lot better, but I noticed the foot was angled up a lot more than I wanted, and just moving it down a little bit more, this was looking really good. This was exactly the effect that I wanted here, and once I saw this, I added in a second leg, but I offset it by 180 degrees. This gives the sort of pedaling effect that I want here, and overall, this isn't looking bad at all. Now, I added it back in the truck here to see how it would look while it's moving around, and overall, this was pretty good. I noticed the truck was getting caught a little bit more often now, but I figured once I added in the wheel, it should smooth things out. And speaking of the wheel, it's actually the next thing I wanted to work on here. Now for that, I'm actually using a very similar design to my first hamster wheel, but I'm changing it up a little bit. Now of course, it deleted all the stuff on the inside that holds on the truck, but you can also see I'm building off of the outside and I'm getting pretty far away from the center. Now once I finished up a quarter of those spokes here, I copy these all around, and you can see now I'm using a couple of roads on the outside to finish up the tire. Now once those were copied around here, you can see I deleted off a lot of the steel, and what I want to do is just make a thin rim around the outside. This is going to serve pretty much exactly like a normal rim, and to hold it onto the center here, I wanted to use cables. Now of course, these are going to look exactly like the spokes of a wheel, and once I got all these in place here, I was actually surprised at how well it was working. There even seemed to be a little bit of suspension as the wheel hit the terrain, and now that I had this, I wanted to try connecting it up to the power source. Now to make this work, I used 4 ropes here to make a 4-bar linkage, and now with the wheel connected up, while it is spinning up a lot slower, it is actually seeming to spin up here, and overall, I thought this might actually just work. The thing is though, I really didn't like this 4-bar linkage here, and what I wanted to do is make an adjustable gearing system. Now to make this work here, I wanted to add in a custom shape, and you can see to start out, I pinned it in place, and I'm building a lot of spokes on it. This is gonna work like a gear, and once I had that all made up now, I changed its texture here, and you can see it actually looks pretty good. Now I moved it to the bottom here and told it to collide with vertices, and you can see now, as the wheel rotates, it's spinning around this gear. This was exactly what I was looking for, and with this, what I wanted to try doing next was building up a chain. Now to make that here, I built up a bunch of roads like this, and you can see I'm slowly making them go around the wheel. Now after getting that gear half surrounded, I started to build straight down with more roads. Now this of course is going to allow me to copy this over one more time and add in a second gear on the bottom. Now just trying this out here, it seemed to be holding together just fine, and I can see that both of the gears were intersecting with the roads. To actually get this moving though, I turned up the power and the speed of these gears, and I can see at a really slow speed, it actually was working. Even making it go 100 times faster, it still seemed to be working fine, although I could see that the chain was having a little bit of trouble. Now calming things down a bit and going down to 20 degrees per second, it was looking pretty good, but I noticed that the chain was a little bit loose, and I wanted to try tensioning it up. Now to do that, I'm adding in another custom shape here, and you can see I'm putting it on the outside of the wheel. After that, I added in an attachment point, and you can see after putting on a hydraulic, I'm able to push it into the chain to tension it a little bit. Now this seemed to be working pretty well here, and I can see a lot of the slack was already removed. Now making it go even tighter here, I can see the bottom gear was now always fully grabbing onto the chain, and this was looking great. This though is only a single gear ratio, and I really did want to make an adjustable gearing system, so to do that, I copied over one of these gears and deleted off a lot of the teeth. Now after doing that here, I rounded off the bottom a bit, and you can see I added on some joints. Now with this, I used some steel pieces to hold it onto the middle, and you can see here, I get part of my gear now. Now I copied 4 of these in place here, and you can see it's fundamentally the same thing that I had before, but there's one big improvement. This time, by adding in hydraulics to the center, I'll be able to push out these sections of the gear and make it appear larger. Trying this out though, the game didn't really seem to like this, and I thought that maybe I encountered a bug, so I tried using some diamond hydraulics instead to push these apart, but it still seemed to be freaking out. Now I even tried switching away from hydraulics entirely and using steel to brace this all together. Now I finally realized here I forgot to delete off the static joints for the gears, so they were permanently being held in place. Now of course, once I had that, I copied it over to my gear system from before, and I had to rebuild part of the chain. This was kind of annoying, but once I got it all in place again here, I wanted to give it another test, and you can see now it still spins up fine when it's really small. Now telling all the hydraulics to engage though, you can see it expands out a lot more and tensions the chain a lot, but it actually does still seem to be getting driven around. Now in fact here, I can see that it's spinning slower than the drive gear, and that means that it's working exactly as it should. But now with the system fully developed, what I wanted to do is copy this over to the back wheel and start to build it up. You'll notice now I'm actually using those 4 sections of gears, but I'm pinning them permanently in place. This just gives me a very easy attachment point on the back wheel, and once I had that in place here, I also want to attach up a gear inside the power wheel. Now of course, I was able to copy it in here just fine, and once I saw that, I added on some anchors here and attached it up to the wheel. This though is kind of where I noticed the problem, because there's a lot of nodes that need to go back and forth through the center of this wheel, and since that gear in the center has collision with those nodes and ends up completely binding up the mechanism and stopping it from working. Now to fix that, I deleted it off, and you can see here, I put my adjustable gear on the outside of that wheel. Now using a 4-bar linkage here, I was able to connect it up and get it spinning just as I wanted. Now with this, everything was looking great, and now what I had to do was make that chain all the way to the back. Now I started out by surrounding this gear in the center here, and I can see that it was holding together. So with this, now you can see what I'm doing is finishing up the whole thing. This took me quite a while to get it working the way that I wanted, but you can see here, the car in the center is still able to spin, and I'm still able to drive up that back wheel. Now I also noticed it really wasn't even going that much slower than before, so it seemed like there weren't really that many losses in using a chain. And I also noticed that the truck in the middle was kind of bouncing around oddly and didn't seem to be making great contact with the wheel. Now to fix that, I decided to switch over to a tractor instead, which is a little bit easier to brace, and with this, I seem to be making much better contact. This should let it perform better once it gets on the ground, but of course to do that, I'm gonna need to add in all of my trussing. Now to do all that, I'm using a lot of steel pieces and connecting up all of the main parts that I braced together. Now after adding all this in though, I noticed something a little weird. The wheel didn't seem to spin up anymore and seemed to get stuck. Now I figured it was probably just nothing, and what I wanted to do now was try to get the wheel to fall down onto the ground. This did seem to work, and the fact that it wasn't spinning now did make sense since there's going to be a lot of friction. Now I went ahead and unbraced everything else except the legs, and what I wanted to do next is build up a nice long track to ride across. Now you can see testing this out, it looked pretty good here, and finally now what I wanted to do was add on a front wheel. Now after getting that pasted in place here and deleting off all of the things that I needed for the back, I ended up just using some trusses here to connect up the legs, and you can see once I did all of that, I also wanted to change the legs to be solid hydraulics. This is for no other reason than I wanted them to pop a little bit more, and I thought that it actually looked pretty good. And I also added on a support going all the way to the back, and you can see now I used a truss going to the front wheel. Now giving this a try, it was very bendy, but it did actually seem to be mostly holding together, but I noticed it still was getting stuck. Now rather than investigate the issue, I was just hoping it was gonna go away at this point, so what I did now is use a couple more pieces to brace up the front better, and I gave it another try. This did seem to help with the bending quite a bit, but it still just wasn't moving at all, and I really was getting worried that the engine wasn't gonna be able to drive the bike across the ground. Now I tried deleting off the chain here to stop driving around the back wheel, and this actually did seem to let it move. Now this was kind of a bad sign, because it did point to the fact that the engine probably just wasn't strong enough, so next what I wanted to try was holding up the back wheel using some fixed joints. This also meant I had to delete off part of the trussing, and I noticed now, while the trusses were heading into the wheel, it did actually seem to be working here. Now the truss slamming into the wheel though did make me think that maybe that was the problem before. Now I tried crushing it in a bit closer, and I could see now it definitely was hitting up against it right here. Now the only way I could think to solve this was to add in some hydraulics and have them expand out to get the nodes further away from the gear teeth. Now this actually seemed to be working really well here, and once I had that, I deleted off all of my joints holding this up in the air, and I tried it out on the ground. And sure enough, testing this out now, it was slowly able to get up to speed here and move across the ground. Now of course though, I'm not quite done yet, and what I wanted to do next was finish up the body of the person sitting on the bike. Now I did this mostly in hydraulics, and I only used a couple of ropes to hold it all together. Now finally for the arms here, I used a couple of diamond hydraulics going straight to the front. This was a pretty decent look here, and while the bike did sag a lot here and made the arms stick up a bit, it overall looked pretty okay. Now the final mechanical component I want to add onto this bike is brakes. This is actually surprisingly easy to add on, and you can see here what I ended up doing was using some hydraulics on the front to push against the front wheel to lock it in place. But now with the bike pretty much finished, what I did here is designed a nice little course for it. Now you can see at the start here, I made a little slope for the bike to get all the way over, and once it does that, it reaches a mostly flat section before it hits into these rocks. These should be a little tricky, but once it gets over all these, it's gonna end up hitting into a checkpoint that switches it into the high gear and allows it to go downhill faster. And after that, it runs into this little divot here, goes up a little slope, and has to brake really hard to prevent from going over the edge. And now you can see I'm trying out the whole thing. Now the bike was slowing down a lot at the top of the ramp, and I was worried the rocks were gonna stop it entirely, but through some careful tuning, I was able to get it over it, and you can see now it's switched into the high gear and it's starting to go downhill. Now I had to turn down my simulation speed a lot here to keep it from just flying away, but you can see here, once it gets down, the brakes end up engaging and it does a pretty good job stopping on the edge. Now finally, I lowered down the checkpoint for the tractor, and with this, that lets me get my full level completion and my final build here. But guys, hope you enjoyed the build, and there's definitely a lot more Polybridge 3 content coming soon. So if you guys have any suggestions of what I should make, definitely make sure to leave them down in the comments below. And also make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any Polybridge 3 stuff, but otherwise, till next time.